Hi everyone, I am really excited about today's guest. If you follow the news, if you follow news in Australia, if you are interested in questions of women's rights, gender identity, I would argue freedom of speech and the ability to be who we want to be and to live our lives, you will be excited like me to know that we have Sel Grover on. She is a remarkable woman, even though she's Australian. So that's a very bad joke to begin an introduction with. Good family connections to New Zealand, I better add. But no, the jokes aside, I am really privileged to have Sel Grover here. She has an amazing background, but is in the news of late because of the development of an app called Giggle for women only, and she's come under enormous pressure, which we will talk about, to allow her app to be accessed by trans women, or as we also know them as biological men. So Sel, welcome along.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a real pleasure. As I say, there's an enormous amount happening for you, but I've been struck as I've talked to people here in New Zealand. Some are aware of your court case and cases. It's only one part of what's been happening for you, but there are some people completely unaware of who your good self is and the Giggle app. So I wonder if, before we get into the real nitty-gritty, if you don't mind, tell us a bit about yourself and this Giggle app.
Yeah, it's one of those things that a lot of people don't know that it's going along, and you would think that because of the magnitude of what is being discussed and how important it is that, you know, there would have been more media attention, which was something that was really frustrating as we were sort of building up to the hearing. So to give you background of me, so basically, I obviously am Australian. I went to America and lived in Hollywood for almost a decade as a screenwriter, rightly or wrongly. It was horrible. I was there in very much in a pre-Me Too world, and it's a horrible industry. It's exactly as you would expect it to be and sort of what all the claims are. When I came back to Australia, it was just, I was in therapy to sort of recover from what I was going through, and I was talking with my mum, and we came up with an idea of basically making an app for women. It was inspired in part by what I was sort of, something my therapist had said, which was like, you need a strong female support network in your life. And it was a light bulb moment. I was like, she's right, I do. And I'd also had experiences when I'd gone to try and find a room to rent on, you know, using the different platforms that are available, where there would be sexual harassment or just really just inappropriateness, or it was just horrible, made a horrible process even more horrible, basically. And so we got the idea to create a woman-only roommate app, and then we very quickly evolved the idea to basically create something where women could have a female-only support network in the palm of their hand. So that's the history of Giggle. I had absolutely no idea that there was any controversy over what a woman is. I thought that this was a really established fact. So before we had even launched the app, we were actually just on the App Store and Google Play in February 2020. Just doing beta testing. Our security measures weren't all in yet. Like we were still ironing out bugs. And what I now know to be trans activists discovered the app and inundated it with one-star reviews and hate and threats, basically plunging it into an algorithmic black hole that we would never have been able to get out of, and punishing us for creating something for women. And I was thrust into this world where the worst thing you can do is know what a woman is. And from there, cut to 4 years later, I'm now in Australia's federal court for knowing what a woman is, basically.
Which I just find extraordinary. I've pondered this quite a bit, not obsessively, before people go, gosh, you're spending all your time thinking about this, but I've been following the case quite closely for me on a number of levels. One, that's the most basic elements of biology. You know, the question that no one seems to, well, very few, certainly in the political and media class, seem to be able to answer is, what is a woman? Secondly, I'm really fascinated. You're a private person with a private company running a private app, and yet you are being forced or cajoled at the moment to change your direction. I find that fascinating. And then thirdly, the whole side of this push by biological men. You know, many will refer to them as trans women, but as biological men, this absolute insistence, I would use the word obsessiveness, to be in your space. And I have to admit, I just don't fully comprehend it. I don't know if you can tease some of what you're seeing out to explain it.
Yes, so I'm in federal court for alleged gender identity discrimination because basically a man who claims to be a woman was one of the thousands of men who tried to get onto the platform, or who did, because sometimes they would get past our gatekeeping and we would manually remove them. And in this case, it's a situation where he did get through and then I manually removed him. I have no recollection of doing it because it wasn't an event. It was not significant in any way, shape, or form. And I then got an Australian Human Rights Commission complaint citing gender identity discrimination. To settle it before it would escalate to court, I would have to agree to let him on, let all men who claim to be women on the platform go to sex and gender education, which could only be re-education, and moderate all content on the platform so that men who claim to be women aren't offended by it. And I said no to this because I was like, I have rights too. Like, this is insane. And so he then, because I refused conciliation or refused to settle at the AHRC, and I very much felt like the Australian Human Rights Commission was not acknowledging my rights or that I had any, and was not on my side or being fair or impartial in any way. And every decision they've made since then has actually only proven that instinct of mine was right. So he filed in federal court. Now, because, as you're saying, I'm a private citizen, it's a private company, I should be allowed to say who and who is not on it. Platforms do that all the time. Platforms kick people off for any different reasons. The main one actually being probably the most controversial is saying the wrong thing or having the wrong set of beliefs. People get banned for that all the time. The moment that you have men sort of coming and trying to destroy something like this isn't specifically for women, while they're claiming that I'm engaging in gender identity discrimination, what they are engaging in is sex discrimination. It's discriminating against me to force me not only to what I have to do with my own company, but what I have to see with my own eyes, I have to accept a man as a woman. And as I said, no one has ever taken consideration the fact that I am about everybody else also has rights. But that is the core of the issue in the gender identity, culture sort of frame, is it is a conflict of rights. You have two groups here. You have men who claim to be women and women. Now both of them have rights. Okay, what happens when they clash? But then as a wider society, you have all citizens who have the right to freedom of belief and freedom of speech and freedom of assembly. And you have this group of people who really couldn't care less about that. And what do we do about that? I think that a man has the right to call himself whatever he wants. I think he can wear whatever he wants, however he wants, whatever that means. But the moment that he is going to cause other people to go along with it or to structure their lives, their company, society in general around that, then that's a problem with it. And that's why this issue is so important, not just for him, but for everyone. Because everyone has rights. People who call themselves trans, they have rights too. And if they want to try and take away people's freedom of belief, freedom of speech, and freedom of assembly, it's a very, very risky game, because that very quickly can come around and bite you, and suddenly you yourself do not have freedom of speech, freedom of belief, and freedom of assembly. So while the case of Tickle v. Giggle, which I don't think I've said that yet, the most ridiculously named court case of all time for a very serious issue, is specifically about sex versus gender, the wider implications of it are the bedrock of a secular, democratic, liberal, free society. And if we don't have these principles, I don't think we have anything.
There's a few things there for me to, if I might tease out. Firstly, I think there's a weird serendipity that this is Giggle versus Tickle. I mean, you've been a screenwriter in Hollywood. I'm being presumptuous here, but I don't know if this would just be put on your plate so easily.
If you were writing a screenplay about the sex versus gender issue, and then you made the central court case called Tickle v. Giggle, the first script note you would get from a producer or a director or a creative exec would be, that's too on the nose, it's too unbelievable. It's crazy that it does sum up the absurdity of the whole situation quite quickly. And you go, yeah, this is something that should be laughed at, actually.
So how is it then that we've managed to get to a situation where gender identity rights are, in my view, trumping biological rights? And putting it really simply, it strikes me, Sal, that what is reality, observable, objective? We can, most of us intuitively work out what a woman is, what a man is. We can even work out, I would argue, where there are moments of distinction. There are some in our community where it's it's not so obvious. I would make the further distinction that that's different from the wider trans debate. But we've got biological reality versus belief. And we seem
Yes.
to be, we seem to be having belief now trumps observable reality. How did we end up there? And how is it, and it's probably more maybe not just the Australian context, but how is it that the Human Rights Commission in Australia is backing the belief side over objective reality of biological sex?
So I think that it's important to just start with the fact that gender identity is utter nonsense. This idea that people have, Helen Joyce, the wonderful author who wrote the book Trans: When Ideology Meets Reality, she calls it a sexed soul. And I think that that's really a great way to frame it. This idea that we all have this like sexed soul within us, this gender identity, and that it is basically how you dress, it's your mannerisms, it's your behaviors, it's just what your innate feeling, your innate identity is and how you express yourself. And then, but it may be not match your sexed body. It doesn't make sense. So why this belief and gender identity is trumping reality in fact is because this concept is such nonsense that if you don't have everybody just being forced to believe it, if there's any crack in the system for anyone to for 1 second go, hang on, what is this? The whole thing falls apart. The gender identity ideology, the moment you just scratch the surface a bit, you go, oh, hang on, there's nothing there. It's all made up. It's all invented, like man-made, pun intended. And so they have to force it because it's not innate. It's not an instinct that any of us have. So if they were to sort of have that sort of live and let live attitude, which us on this side are saying, like, live your life however you want to, identify, blah, 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 but reality still exists, well, that crumbles their entire belief system. So that's why it's incredibly authoritarian, and it doesn't allow anybody else to have any opinions, the right to observe facts. And that's why it is, I think, the most dangerous ideology that we've seen since we all know what the last really dangerous ideology in society was last century. I think this is the most dangerous since then.
You touch on me, so many good points where to start, but it is that intolerance which is coming with it, as you say. For me, it's, and you would have heard it all before you're going through it directly, but it's the emperor has no clothes. And anyone who dares to be that child who says, oh, hold on a moment, is to be swiftly crushed, for want of a better term. And unfortunately, you're right at the forefront of it at the moment. And there is no tolerance. I've often noted those who speak a lot about tolerance and diversity don't seem to be particularly supportive of it in this case. But if I might, one of the things which has struck me, and you touched on it, we have a society now that if you step out of line, you get quickly cancelled. So here, certainly in New Zealand, a number of private companies, if they don't agree with your views or values, they will reject to provide you service. And particularly if you're not supportive of the trans community, you will be cancelled. And it's trumpeted by those in support. They say, so no, it's a private company, they can do what they want. Yeah, I reflect on your situation. You're a private company, yet you're not allowed to do what you want.
So everything with gender ideology, the opposite is true. So they say men who claim to be women are women. No, they're actually just men. They say puberty blockers are reversible. No, they are not. Every claim they make, the opposite is true. And so they will say, we're all for diversity and inclusion. No, they want everybody to think the exact same way. And if you don't, you are excluded. They will say, oh, your private company can do whatever they want. Well, then a private company wants to go and do something just for adult human females. Well, no, you can't do that. So all you have to do is just undo and see the nonsense of it all is actually just listen to them. Some of the sort of little Twitter things that they have is like Operation Let Them Speak. Is just let the trans activists speak. They should, because then everybody can hear them and everybody can see that what they're saying is utter nonsense. It's a contradiction, and they are the most illiberal, least accepting demographic that I've ever seen. Is what I'm saying on my side. I'm saying be however you want to be. You're just, if you're a male, you're a male. That can't change. It's really that simple. And, you know, I don't think that there is anybody, even on their side, who are saying this stuff. I don't think there's a single person who actually believes that men are women or that women are men, but that's much less an issue, much less spoken about. But I don't think a single person actually believes it. But what they do love is the power it gives them. They love this. It's very easy. It's very cheap. It's just they can feel superior with zero effort. Look at how like much more intellectual and moral I am because I accept this bloke in a frock. Like, okay, well, great for you. But you're just. I don't personally think that anyone is that superior because they'll accept nonsense.
I often refer to it as a new currency. It's a currency which gets traction these days, and well, I'm thinking of a particular case, and I'm just hesitating to make sure I don't particularly identify them. But you know, they've got multiple children, but all of them are non-binary, trans, and so forth. And you go, statistically, that's pretty much impossible. You know, love and support your kids, but it's almost impossible. I think this has got more to do with the parents, but it's been celebrated and I think affecting the children. But again, it's a currency. It pays off. Society goes, oh, isn't that lovely?
100%. I mean, you see how the people who just indulge in this nonsense get elevated constantly. And if you question it, you are demonized. I mean, we all know what happened in New Zealand last year with Kelly J. Keane, like completely demonized. Literally all this woman is saying is that women are adult human females and women should be able to speak about that. That's as controversial as it gets of what she's saying. And I'm like, this is something everybody said like 10 years ago. If someone had told me 10 years ago that this is what I would be doing with my life now, I honestly would not have believed them. Not in my wildest nightmare. I just go, I'm just stating facts. I'm just stating the most obvious, basic things that like preschoolers know. And then some people are saying, oh, wow, you're really brave for saying that. I'm like, I'm just saying that men aren't women. This isn't bravery. But because of this climate that is being created, it at least appears to be brave. I personally, I don't feel it ever has been bravery on my part. I felt like I had no choice. I was just like, it was. I also actually thought when it first happened to me, I thought that what was being said was so preposterous that no one would believe it and it would be over really quickly. And I was proven wrong on that. I'm willing to admit I was wrong on that one.
Well, one of the things which it struck me, you just mentioned it earlier, is how absurd this is. That's one of the first point, and absolutely agree with you. And secondly, how fast it's moved. It scares me. There's a great sort of philosopher, writer, historian, Niall Ferguson, who says history is moving faster now than ever has. And so, as you say, 10 years ago, this discussion would be unheard of, and yet now it's sort of accepted gospel truth. But you mentioned how frail the arguments are. I would add so irrational, feet of clay sort of stuff. But that's what then precipitates, it seems, such aggressive, violent, as we saw with Posey Parker in New Zealand, but that aggressive attack to make sure no one questions. There's very little rational discussion. And so you're at the forefront, and I keep coming at you. You are the target there in Australia, not just with the Human Rights Commission, the courts, the activists, I'm sure on social media. So the question then, after my little monologue, is why are you doing this? Because so many other people, and by the way, I'm pleased you are, but so many people back away, understandably. They don't like the abuse. What has driven you to stand up and to speak so strongly and consistently?
I think, like, as I said, initially, I thought that the claim was so absurd that if I just like said a few things like of highlighting how absurd it was, everyone would go, oh, of course, like on your way, like that's ridiculous. And then it was the next shock that not only were they saying men or women, but institutions, organizations, and governments, and a lot of people were accepting that. And that was a bigger shock. And by that point, I was like, well, I can't back down now because this is really scary. Because if I can't say that a man is not a woman, if I can't say that, like, look at a picture of a man and say that's a man, what rights do I have? I've always been really interested in countries that where citizens don't have rights, because I've always thought what's it like to live in a society like that? I've just never been able to comprehend it. the torture that must be. And of course, there's lots of places on the planet right now that are significantly worse than our societies. And so I'm not sort of completely making the comparison, but you do see how quickly it gets there. And I just thought, if they can make you believe that men are women, then they can force you to believe anything. And that is not a place that I want to be in, nor is it something that I want my daughter to have to experience. Because I just sort of thought, if I don't speak up, how do I sleep at night knowing that eventually the fight's going to be hers? Like, what rights am I giving this little girl? It's the only thing as her mother that I can do is to make sure that there is a world for her that is safe and has opportunities for her. And I don't want it to be that she can't, that there's basically no sports teams that she can have, that there's no spaces that she can go to away from men, or that she just can't even have any ideas that and thoughts in her brain that deviate from what the government tells her she has to believe. Like, what Orwellian nonsense is that? I just every part of it, like, just my dad, who is from New Plymouth, he had always raised me with question everything. It was always like, so anything that would happen while I was growing up and I'd have like my first reaction to it or something, or I'd be trying to work out what I thought, he would just be like, think about it and like question it. Why? And so that, it was just sort of this came along and I sort of just fell into that on steroids, because I was just like, why? And I think that I think there's a lot of reasons why this has happened and gotten as out of hand as it has, and been embraced by so many places. But as I said, I think that it does come down to control. If they can make you believe men or women, they can make you believe anything. And that is the goal for a lot of very sinister organizations.
Well, for what my view's worth, I share the same approach. My parents taught me the most valuable word is why, and I've driven people mad ever since, because that's what I do. It's always asking why. I don't follow orders well. I also know I'm often wrong. I love being challenged, but I have noticed that authoritarian, I hesitate to use that word because some groups in society take it too far, but we are being told more and more by government what we can and cannot say. And it strikes me the fact that the likes of the Human Rights Commission, so in New Zealand, our one is effectively an arm of government. I assume it's the same in Australia. Is policing your thoughts? In fact, just to run down that, I mean, they wanted you to go to a re-education system, like a struggle session, the great old, communist struggle sessions where you will learn the error of your ways. They wanted you to do that.
Yeah, in a way, I actually do kind of regret not going to the sex and gender re-education camp that they wanted me to go, that the AHRC wanted me to go to, because I would have liked to have taken the notes. The reason for that, why I said no to that one, was because I was about 7 months pregnant by this point when we were going through the AHRC complaint. And I was like, I can't deal with the stress of this. I was just like, absolutely no way am I putting myself in that situation. But with Tickle v. Giggle, the case, this is when it became like escalated for me and got scarier. The Australian Human Rights Commission actually intervened in the case as amicus curiae, which means friend of the court, which is quite a normal thing for the AHRC to do in one sense. But they intervened in this case to interpret the law. So basically in Australia, what happened, we have the Sex Discrimination Act, which was brought in, it was enacted in 1984, which of all the years. But it was, we signed CEDAW, which is the Convention of the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, which is a UN convention, and it's sort of like an international Bill of Rights for women that was created in 1979, and Australia signed it in 1983. And then we enacted that in our law by doing the Sex Discrimination Act. New Zealand did as well, actually. New Zealand and Australia are two countries that are really well positioned to defend CEDAW, which is a document about biological reality. It's females and it's not gender identity, and it's not men as women, because we actually did put a lot of it just straight into our legislation. But in Australia in 2013, lobbied by the Australian Human Rights Commission, they did amendments and they put gender identity into the Sex Discrimination Act, making it this utterly muddled document of like, basically, what does it even mean? And so the AHRC intervened in Tickle v. Giggle to interpret that law and basically just say to them, I mean, I sat there and listened to them say it, that, yeah, anyone can just claim to be a woman. Now, the only people who would need to claim to be a woman are men, because women just are women. So this is just how nonsense it is. I mean, you're sitting there in a court of law where, you know, facts and evidence are supposed to matter more than anything. To just be told something that is such nonsense. In their submissions, which are publicly available, that's why I can talk about them freely, they say that there's no such thing as biological sex. They say that sex can be changed. Sex is not limited to male and female. They say that a man's desire to be pregnant is sufficient for him to be considered a woman under the Sex Discrimination Act. Like, utter nonsense that, yeah, a government department is saying to its citizens. So while obviously I come at this from, like, you know, female spaces and women's rights perspective, my North Star on it and why I care about it for wider society and why I think everyone should care is because that's what the government is saying and trying to make you believe. And whether you are a woman, a man, a girl, or a boy, this will affect your life. And so we have to stand up against it as citizens and say, no, sorry, governments do not get to make up their own facts. No way.
So if I've understood you correctly, your Australian Sex Discrimination Act and the interpretation of CEDAW has basically thrown sex as the biological reality of sex out the window and replaced it with, as we were talking earlier, a belief system, which is how I view a lot of the gender identity stuff. People can believe whatever they want to be, but, you know, I'm a dolphin, but, you know, don't have to build me an aquarium. So, sorry, I'm referencing an old South Park there for anyone who wants to pick up on it. But so again, your Sex Discrimination Act in Australia doesn't now include biological sex.
Well, I mean, this is why the Tickle v. Giggle case is so important, because we're actually the first case that's ever been challenging this legislation. So it's still called the Sex Discrimination Act. The word sex is still there, although it doesn't have any definition. They took out the definition of men and women in those 2013 amendments, which is incredibly sinister. So they did that so that basically anyone can claim to be that. It fits in with the wider thing that's happening globally of, you know, just that, yeah, to replace sex with gender identity, because this stupid ideology cannot have any cracks in it, because then it destroys the whole thing. Like, if you say that, oh, men can only be women in some circumstances, for example, then even there you're destroying the illusion, because you're not accepting them completely as women. But it is sort of an all or nothing thing, because you either are a woman or you're not. There's very few times in life where you know that you are 100% right about something. And this is one. I'm usually like you. I'm much more skeptical, or I'm happy to be like, oh, I could be wrong about this. I know I am right about this. There is no man who is actually a woman. But furthermore, like Richard Dawkins has actually explained it, that the uniqueness of biological sex is the fact that it is so strictly binary. It's male and female. There's no other options. There's no other. It's sperm and ova. That's it. Everyone who says that it's a spectrum or there's more, it's like, what are they? Like, they don't do the next sentence of that. Like, this is how superficial and shallow this stupid ideology that's dictating our lives is. But most things are on a spectrum. When does day become night? When is short tall? When is young old? We've got spectrums for pretty much everything in the universe. Biological sex is so unique because it's binary. And that's why it's so important to protect the reality and the fact of that, because it is really the most fundamental truth that we have. Like, in the infancy of human beings, we knew the difference between male and female. I mean, you know, we didn't know if the earth was, what shape the earth was, but we knew male and female. And now to be told in this sort of information age where no new information about this has actually been discovered, just something has been made up. Again, this is why it's so important to protect this.
Well, for me, it's at least twofold as I listen to you. One, for the sake of protecting women's rights, and actually men's rights too, if we can't agree the basic objective truth of biological sex. But the second is, and you've touched on it a few times, I just want to emphasize it to viewers and listeners, is a lot of this is government, if you will, being pushed, mandated, pursued. And, it's the misquote of old Voltaire, who said, those who can make you believe in absurdities can make you do violent things. Bad paraphrase from my side. But yeah, governments which are imposing its will, prosecuting, persecuting people with a different viewpoint, you go, whoa, we should have learnt this. And so I just think that's a really important point to draw out. But a question I've got is when I think of history, women have fought very, very hard, Sal, to get their rights and to get their own spaces, their freedoms. When I think, not that I was around in the 50s and 60s, but there seemed to be a strong movement in feminism coming through then. Still had a way to go. Sex and gender were split out, if I look at it, as concepts around that time. They were seen as distinct. And yet now we seem to have this absurdity that gender and sex have been blended back together, and then sex has been tossed out the window. But we do seem to be going backwards. Just in that moment where women, you've succeeded in pushing men out of your spaces, a certain group of men are forcing their way back in. And I just wonder, what do you think is driving that, to the extent you can psychoanalyze those thousands of men trying to get on your app? Because that's another thing. What on earth is going through these guys' minds? They want to be on your app, in your spaces, in your sports. What from your experience is driving them?
Well, I wouldn't even begin to guess or think that there's just one reason. I don't have the psychology of a man, so I can't even begin to imagine what it is that makes men do this. And it just matches with, they don't have the psychology of a woman. You're right in that this is completely regressive. It is the most regressive thing. So the best way to explain it is, so biological sex is just true, just real, male, female, blah, 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 very understood. Then you have this sort of concept of gender, which depends on who you talk to, has a different meaning. This is the thing. No one can agree on anything. It's been used in various different ways throughout society. So, for example, when I lived in the US, gender was always used as the polite synonym for sex. So when it was on forms, or if they were talking about male and female, they would use gender. And there's some really valid reasons for it, apparently. Like, apparently, during when they would do data collection, if they had sex on there, people would write "yes, please," rather than, just doing it, just jokes. And it just got in the way. So because of just like the immaturity of society, and just for clarity, they did just have this polite synonym, which, little did we know, created this amazing opportunity for all of this confusion that there is now. Because remember, transgenderism was once upon a time called transsexualism. Now you're called transphobic now if you use transsexual. I'm of the mind that none of the transsexual shouldn't exist either. There should have never been any treatment plan that involved someone pretending that they are the opposite sex. How unhealthy and bad for your mental health is that? Should have all just been trying to get somebody comfortable in the body, the one body they have for the rest of their life. But so basically now they use this concept of gender and gender identity as, that is what is real in society. And so if you are somebody who likes dresses and makeup, then you are a woman, irregardless of your biological sex. There's a great meme that goes around all the time, and it's conservatives used to say that women do the dishes. Feminists said anyone can do the dishes, and gender ideology says whoever does the dishes is a woman. That's basically what it is, to sum it all up. It's taking what we thought what woman has spent a lot of time trying to break out of. Like, gender was a term also used by feminists because they were trying to separate sort of these roles that were expected of women that weren't allowing women to participate in society fully. We had to stay in the home and we couldn't go and get jobs and things like that. And they did call these like sort of gendered expectations. And when people say, this is all feminists' fault, I'm like, no, I don't think that it is. I don't think that any feminists, 100 years ago were trying to break down and understand why women didn't have rights, being like, our goal here is to make sure that men are women. No, while there are definitely some women who are at fault here, like, don't get me wrong, we're not completely like innocent as a group there. But this whole mess would not exist if it was not for men claiming to be women. Because if we were in a movement that was just about women claiming to be men, do you think we'd be having this conversation? Do you think that the AHRC would be going, oh, they're definitely men, and governments would be saying, yeah, they're dudes? No, there's a reason that like trans men are men is not the chant that's led anywhere. It's not. We're not hearing about trans men and taking over men's sports or taking opportunities from men. It doesn't exist. The only time we ever hear about trans men is when they're pregnant. That's how regressive this ideology is. They only care about them when they're doing the one thing that females can do. So, yeah, it's just nonsense. I just come back. I do these big long paragraphs, and then I'm just like, oh my God, it's just nonsense.
But it highlights what you touched on earlier. It's just so full of glaring inconsistencies that they have to, if you will, act quite aggressively. I say quite a masculine response. It's aggressive. It's bullying. I know I'm now playing into gender stereotypes, but there we go. It's aggressive. It's bullying. And as I say, you've just got your spaces, your array of freedoms, and some men have found their way through. And again, the absurdities, like I've often been told, you can't identify people based on their genitalia. And oh, okay, well, that's an interesting argument. And yet a lot of the trans activists then become obsessed with changing their genitalia and then exaggerated versions of what it looks to be a woman. And it's like, can no one see this contradiction in it? But again, yeah, transphobe, you get called names, shut down.
They say that for us that we're obsessed with genitals because we say that women don't have penises. And I'm like, no. You're obsessed with genitals because you're performing surgeries on them. We're saying don't do that. But even just what you were saying just before about like the stereotypical like masculine response to something, like there is like some stereotypes exist for a reason, and they do help us identify things in society. It's one of the interesting things like with gender identity and how it is articulated in Australian law in the Sex Discrimination Act. It does say gendered behavior. And I'm like, okay, well, the gendered behavior that I'm experiencing in the case from the person who's has taken me to court, the male person who's taken me to court, I'd say this is very toxically masculine behavior of just not accepting that a woman has said no to him and wanting to force me to believe he is something that he is not. This is not like really sweet, stereotypical feminine behavior. And even just from how the trans activists treated Giggle from the moment they discovered it, and I didn't know any of this was going on, what they've actually done is proven the need for a female-only online space. They've actually just displayed the exact behavior of why women might want to refuge somewhere away from that. I always feel I have to preface this by saying I'm fine with there being male-only spaces for socialization and recreation as well. I do think that there's been a little bit of overreach on that. I don't think that men should have to apologize for wanting to just hang out with the guys. I think it's actually really healthy. I think that that's sometimes where men can go and have conversations and talk about things, which is really good, and I think men should do more of, that they don't get to do, or if they just want to go and like, play rugby or whatever and just not have women around, like fine, I don't care. In law, it plays out very differently because of the safety aspect of it and sort of what they've created, these like barriers you need to be able to meet. But for women, for female-only spaces, like this overly toxic behavior that is being displayed from gender ideology activists is exactly why we want female-only spaces. At the end of the day, really good, decent men, of which most of them are, would never even think to go into a female-only space. The moment you're dealing with a man who wants to go to a female-only space, you're dealing with a very toxic person, potentially a predator, at least very much behaving like a predator, who is proving why female-only spaces need to exist and why there needs to be gatekeeping on them. So I'm saying everything about gender ideology proves the contradiction of it and the importance of the reality on the other side of it.
And that possibly sums up a big part for me is, it strikes me, again, I'm at a distance, but no one seems to be asking the trans women or the biological men insisting to get into your female spaces why they are so obsessed, so aggressive. All the question seems to be on you. As a woman, a biological woman, you're being asked to justify why you're a biological woman. I probably articulated that badly, but it just seems, why is the pressure on you, not the people trying to get
I
into
know.
your spaces?
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's basically they make these completely absurd claims, and the onus is not on them to back them up, which usually it is. Yeah, they always say, oh, you're obsessed with bathrooms or change rooms or whatever. It's like, well, you are. Like, they would just exist. There's something that existed in society. No one really thought that much about them. Like, when I came up with the idea for Giggle, female-only spaces certainly were not front-page news. Like, we just thought we'd be this little niche app that, like, sort of existed. We'd hit our goals. It would be like a nice, quiet life. If it's like, okay, well, if a bathroom obsession, if that's something we shouldn't have, well, then just go and use the one that's in accordance to your biological sex, like everyone else in society. Go and compete on the sports team that is in accordance with your biological sex. That's the rules that everyone else has to abide by. Like, that is the ultimate inclusion, just having to follow the same rules as everybody else. Like, that's what, say, gay marriage was about. It was just, can we please have the same rules as everyone else? And I'm like, yeah, of course you can. Gender ideology is asking for privileges beyond what everybody else has, and to restructure society so that the rules can bend only in their favor. Who cares about everybody else? And that's why it's literally not sustainable. I have no doubt that eventually this will fall. I think gender ideology will become a thing of the past. I would like it to be tomorrow, but whether it's in a year, 5 years, 10 years, it will end because it's not sustainable. At the end of the day, we all know how babies are made.
Just for viewers, we will not be going through. No, I'm kidding. No. But no, we do. But this is, and I better start wrapping up because I know you're busy. But for me, there's at least 2 points. One is we've just accepted so much for a while, and yet there's been this aggressive attempt to make us believe absurdities, and you wonder what the next thing is. So if we drink the Kool-Aid on this, well, what's the next absurdity? The second, though, when I give talks or am often opining, I also believe this will fall. It's that feat of clay. It will implode. But for what my opinion's worth, I worry that when these things do implode, they don't go smoothly. There's a lot of collateral damage on the way through. So while I look forward to it imploding at one level, I am concerned about how that ultimately plays out in society. So time will tell.
I completely agree. But I think that that's really what, like, sort of people like us who are speaking out about it, one of the things that we are trying to do is limit the collateral damage and the carnage of it all. I mean, obviously, I think women's rights, what we've learned from this is that we always have to protect them, and we're always going to have to sort of fight for them on one level. And like, okay, but I think we will get them back eventually. I think that the truth will prevail, and I think that everyone will go, okay, yep, women, and you can have that. I think that anything that, I do agree that affirmative action, for example, does have a lifespan, but I think gender ideology has reset the clock on affirmative action on women's rights. But then I think that the demographic of people who are going to be the ones where we're going to be having to deal with this is the wrong phrase. I don't mean deal with it in like that it's a hassle or that they're a burden, but I mean that we're going to have to be there for them forever. The young people who got sucked into this, whether through their parents or through their own just, sort of misguided youth, and are going to deal with the physical and mental repercussions of it forever. So these are the detransitioners who were put on a medical pathway, who had unnecessary hormones and surgeries for literally no reason, and they were lied to. How they're going to sort of reintegrate back into society and have trust in anything when they have been lied to so much by all of the people, whether it's their families or their teachers and schools or the institutions, governments, medical industry, anything that should have actually been caring for them and telling them the truth, and they weren't. As a society, that's going to be a long time of dealing with that. Like, it might be there in the corner of conversations for the rest of our lives, like for at least a generation. I think that's the part that makes me the most sad.
I share that too. I mean, we're talking about obviously the damage as this unwinds itself, but there's been enormous damage done already. It horrifies me, actually. I'd use some other choice words, but I better be cautious or diplomatic for a change. But yeah, just it horrifies me, and it's not just the physical damage that's substantial, but it is that trust in society. And I think a lot of our young ones now will say, "Why were you not there? Why did no one speak out?" But they can take, if I might, some heart that actually someone like yourself is, Sel. I think that's just incredible. But before I wind up, can I ask? And it was something we talked about very, very briefly off camera. Is amongst all those who are supporting the trans activists, supporting the case against you, there are quite a number of women. It's not exclusively women, there's a whole range of people, but there's still quite a number of women supporting trans women or biological men in this space. I don't know if you've seen or got any insights on what might be driving that or not.
Yeah, I think there is a depressing amount of women who support this nonsense, and it's just the unfortunate reality that women are not immune from believing bullshit. There has always been like a cohort of women who have worked against women. So there were women who were really against women getting the right to vote, for example. There have been women who fought against women being able to divorce their husbands, get bank accounts, all that kind of thing. We've always women who have actually wanted to advance women's rights have always worked against not only men who don't want that to happen, but a group of women as well who don't want to. So I put the women who support men claiming to be women and have fallen into this ideology into that group. They're just the modern day equivalent of women who didn't want women to get the right to vote. So why? Okay, so in terms of like once upon a time with the voting thing, it was because it's quite a normal, natural human instinct to just like to maintain the status quo, and changing everything can be really scary. This is obviously not maintaining a status quo, but what it is doing, what gender ideology does, is with this concept of be kind and accept people, which is something, be kind and accept people for who they are, is something that pretty much any decent person just already does anyway, or wants to do and always improve upon. So it manipulates empathy with that, because you're not actually accepting people for who they are. You have to accept people for who they're not, and you're having to accept a lie. But because it creates this idea that you are a bad person if you don't want to do that, I think that it really scares women a little bit more than men, because men and women are different and our psychologies are different. On top of that, women do see that it is women who get punished the most for speaking out about this. So for all the men who do speak out, and we're always so grateful and we want more too, they don't get nearly as punished as women do. The court cases are, I think 90% around the world are women being taken to court. The careers destroyed, lives destroyed, the death threats, the rape threats, especially the rape and death threats, are pretty exclusively to women. Occasionally not to forget about, there are some gay men who really are on the front line of this, who get horrible abuse as well. But I think how horrible and public that it is to women, one of the points that being made there is to say to other women, if you speak up, you will be treated this way. And I think that for, say, a woman who is, say, against what I'm saying or what I'm doing, it is much less intimidating for me to say, well, I think you're an idiot. I'm not going to threaten her. I'm not going to intimidate her. I'm not going to try and destroy her livelihood. I'm going to say, you can have your opinion. That's fine. I just think you're stupid and I disagree with it. If she says that she agrees with me, she knows that she is going to experience a lot of hate. So in terms of a survival instinct, it is actually much better for her to not back me. So I understand it. I don't agree with it. I think that this is such an important issue that it is time to actually just go, you know what? I'm not scared about that. I don't care that they're going to say all of these things. If everybody who actually knows that this is nonsense spoke up in the same week, they can't cancel us all. They can't punish us all. It would end straight away. Like if 3 million Australian adults went, actually, no, we're all going to go to the streets and say no to this, politicians would go, there you go. We know where the public stand on this. And we know that this is building, so it's good, but we know where the public stands on this. We will go and we will change the legislation. And it's because people have just been, scared into submission. But again, it's a natural human instinct. And it's a survival mechanism. I understand it. So I don't think that I don't think that a single woman who is against me actually believes that men are women. Not one. I think if you put them on a lie detector test, it would be shown within seconds. I just think they're scared, or there are some who are benefiting from it, whether that is professionally, and so there's a little bit of fear there, so they don't want to lose their job. Fine, but then there's also ones who are profiting financially. There also are a few that I think are just evil, which are the ones who are performing the surgeries. I think that's I have no excuse for them. Like, go to prison, rot in hell. But yeah, I think ultimately it's either fear or financial gain. I have more respect for the fear than I have for the financial gain.
But doesn't the fear side, to me, just reinforces the very arguments you're making, that fear, that bullying, which then translates into their support, so that, well, they're scared, is the very reason why we want these spaces.
100%, it proves us right. Them being fearful of the attacks from these men who claim to be women prove that we need female-only spaces away from these men who claim to be women. So they're just proving our point.
And I think, sadly, and it's only an observation, but a lot of in the political class and media just don't talk about this either. There's a complicity, I find, in the silence. It's the silence, I suspect. Yeah.
They're fearful or they're profiting from it. I think for politicians at this point, there's no excuse. If you are a politician that knows that there is something wrong here, go and find out exactly what it is, educate yourself, and then speak up. Otherwise, there is no point in being a politician. If you are not going to go and stand up for truth and all citizens, no point to you. Go and work in the private sector.
Well, I can say, outing myself as a former politician, I used to say to colleagues, if you don't have an opinion on something, why are you here? Even if it's completely different to mine or others, yeah, you're meant to have an opinion. Hey, I better wrap it up there because I've taken so much of your time. Can I just look? I'm sure many have said this, and I just want to add my voice for what it's worth. Is just thank you for what you're doing and standing up to the abuse, the bullying. You talked about death and rape threats. This is torrid, horrid. You add all adjectives, and just grateful that you're doing. I've always been struck by another quote, the strength of one strengthens the spines of many. And it's really my hope that your work in advocacy pays off. But if I can ask, is there a way people can support you? I have no doubt that this is costly. Is there a way that listeners and viewers can support you?
Yes. So basically, we had to raise $500,000 to fight this in federal court. And we raised it. It's amazing. It was a slog, basically, to raise, as much money, more money than most people earn in a year. But we did it, and it was through the generosity of people from all over the world who care about women's rights and the right to free speech and freedom of belief and assembly. So we have a crowdfund. It's gigglecrowdfund.com, where there's more information about the case and updates. So at the moment, it's very boring. We're just waiting for a verdict. It should come in the next about 2 to 5 months now. So what, we're in May. Yeah, I mean, it could be late June. I don't know. I couldn't speculate. Now, there is a very high chance that we will lose in federal court. We have always known this. I've known this since AHRC days, when I was sort of told what the journey would be. We are going to have to go to the High Court to change the law, because as the law stands at the moment with gender identity, it's just the whole problem is it's there, and it does not factor in women's rights at all. So to fight this in the High Court is going to be another at least $500,000 to $750,000. So all up, this is going to be about a $1.2 million experience before we've even launched the platform properly. Because the platform, I will say, is offline at the moment. It's offline because of this court case. So Giggle Crowdfund is still up and running. Now we don't know definitely that we're going to appeal yet, because we don't have a verdict, but that's where we are. We're waiting.
Honestly, I don't know how you do it. I'm grateful you are. I really am. I've been under fire in the past for things, but nothing like you're going through. So look, for those listening, if you're supportive of what Sel and others are leading here, please get in behind it. But look, thank you so much for giving so much of your time to chat, and to really wish you well for the future. And again, just thank you for speaking up for reality.
Thank you so much for listening to reality. Thank you.